Hello and welcome to Children's Time. It's good to be with you again this week. This week we're going to talk a little bit about the story about Jesus' mom Mary and how she found out she was going to have baby Jesus. This story takes place a long, long time ago, over 2,000 years ago, in a little place called Nazareth. Now, Nazareth was just an ordinary town, and in it was a young woman named Mary. And she was just an ordinary young woman. She came from a family that didn't have a lot of money. They didn't have a lot of power. Nobody really knew who they were. And all of a sudden, one day, an angel showed up in Mary's house and started to talk to her. And Mary was a little surprised. In fact, the angel's first words were, "Do not be afraid. I've come to tell you something good." And he goes on to tell Mary that she has been chosen to have God's baby, to bring God into the world as the baby Jesus. And Mary is surprised, probably a little confused, and she wonders, why me? Just an ordinary girl from this ordinary town. And God is choosing me. And she says to the angel, "I will do whatever God asks me to do." And so Mary ends up having baby Jesus, the Son of God. It's pretty amazing that God chooses Mary, and that Mary is brave enough to agree to what God is asking her to do. And when we think about this, we can think about in our own lives. Are there moments when you've done something that you thought was really scary, but you knew it was the right thing to do? Or maybe you've been asked to do something that you were a little confused about or nervous about, but again, you knew it was what you were supposed to do. That happens to a lot of us, right? And all throughout the Bible, we hear stories of God calling very ordinary people to do pretty amazing things. And God even calls you and me to do things now to share God's love with those around us. One time when I was in college, I went on a mission trip to a place called South Africa. Now, it's a country in the very southern part of the African continent. And I went on this mission trip and just sort of went along with what everybody else was doing until one day we were in a place called a hospice. Now, a hospice is a place where people go who are dying from a disease that they can't cure. And in this hospice, there was a girl who was probably about 9 or 10 years old, and she was dying from a disease called AIDS. And she grabbed my hand as I walked by, and she said something to me. But I couldn't understand her because she was speaking in her native language, and so I had to ask the translator with us to translate for me. She asked me to pray for her. Now I was pretty terrified. I did not like to say things out loud. I was a very shy person, and I had no idea how to pray or what to even say. But I knew it was important. She really, really wanted to hear a prayer for her. So I took a deep breath. I asked God to help me. I just started praying. And after I finished the prayer, she squeezed my hand, and she seemed to find a little bit of peace in that. And I knew that that moment wasn't from me. It came right from God. God had just used me to pass along the words that God knew she needed to hear. And so that was a very special moment for me. And I'm sure there are moments in your lives where God has used you, even if you might not know it. Sometimes God just calls us to step out of our comfort zone and say a prayer. Sometimes God asks us to be kind to someone who just needs a little bit of kindness that day. And when we answer God in these moments, we're being used by God to do God's work in the world. And some of the things God asks us to do are a little bit scary, sometimes a little confusing, but we'll know what God needs us to do. And we can be brave like Mary and do them. Will you pray with me? God who speaks to the young and to the old, thank you for the gift of your Son in this world. Thank you for using ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Help us to feel your presence when life feels scary or confusing. Amen. Well, thanks for joining me this week on Children's Time, and I'll see you again next week.